The next speaker I can't ask on stage because you can't see him already, because you will soon see him on stage, but he is sitting in Berlin. We feel very honored that Klaus Töpfer agreed to be our patron. As we already heard, Klaus Töpfer was Minister of Environment in Germany during the government of Helmut Kohl and former Executive Director of the Environmental Program of the United Nations. He will speak about Schumpeter was right. Constructive destruction is the challenge of the times. Please, Klaus Töpfer. Can we see you? Can we hear you?
Hear me
yes,
too.
Wonderfully.
Yeah,
welcome, Klaus Töpfer.
Yeah. Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, dear colleagues, of course, as a patron of this noble organization, I'm extremely proud to be allowed to address this 8th International Convention of the Environmental Laureates in Basel today. It's quite a drama that due to the pandemic, it's not possible to be with you as well, but it's also a good reason to be in line with the need of environment protection and to decrease our CO2 footprint by staying at home and seeing you only sitting in a nice hall, of course, quite convenient. I learned in the meantime that I now know who was responsible for the change of nuclear power in Germany. This is always helpful to learn. Thank you very much for this. Only to inform you, I also was the co-chair of this ASIC commission in Germany who recommended to phase out nuclear power. And by the way, the next year, we will phase out the last nuclear power plant in Germany. We were looking forward to see the same structure in wonderful Switzerland as well soon. We are really living in a dramatic world, in a dramatic time. Mankind, without any doubt, reached central tipping points for the survival of mankind. We know it with climate, we see it with biodiversity, we are aware of the problems with water in quantitative and qualitative terms, we see it with food security, and we even see that health is very closely linked with the stability of nature. What we learned with the corona pandemic underlines this quite clearly. Therefore, the living conditions, even the survival of mankind, quite now, nearly 8 billion people living on this wonderful planet Earth are on stake. When I was born, we had only 2.5 billion people living on this earth. Now we have 8 billion. In 80 years, yes, I'm an old man, but nevertheless, 80 years from 2.5 to 8 billion. And we see a huge social problem linked with those figures. The average per capita income in Germany is nearly by going to 50,000 US dollar. In Africa, where I had the chance to be responsible for the United Nations Environment Program headquartered in Nairobi in Kenya, these were 2.5 billion people. And 2,000 dollar per capita. And if you see the average age in Germany, nearly 50 years, in Africa, around 20 years. These are the challenges. We need a development always under the preconditions of globalization. And I believe that this is very often forgotten in a world where this is not a clear understanding that if we do our homework, things are gone. No, our homework is also going to the overall world. The globalization of all those problems are a must. Foreign policy is nearly over, but nobody believes. Quite on the contrary, we are going back in a world where America is first, and the next is first, and the third is first. They all are looking for their own considerations, being aware that all what we have to do, it mentioned some of those topics, need a global solution, need global cooperation, especially also in the social dimension. And therefore, I want to put this on the beginning of my little contribution. 10 minutes or 50 minutes cannot change the world, but I want to bring at least some central point to your discussion. These are the social considerations globally, but also within our societies. If you see this development in the so-called developed world, the diversion in the societal structure, then you know that we have to do a lot to integrate those topics and not to separate them. When I mentioned Schumpeter, I believe it is very necessary to say, if there are really danger for survival of mankind, you cannot make only marginal changes. You must have an abrupt situation. We learned this again and again. If you don't do this, you are also losing the economic consideration, the economic perspective for the future. And therefore, to make really a new start seems me to be extremely important to overcome the mentioned topic. Mankind, the world is now confronted with a mankind who is a quasi-geological force, as we mentioned it in the one or the other publication. And if it was then concentrated in this wonderful little contribution of Paul Crutzen in Nature 2002, the geology of mankind. We are not any longer living in the Holocene, not in a natural age epoch. No, we are living in a man-made age, in an Anthropocene, and we must be aware that all the developments we are confronted with now are directly or indirectly coming from mankind, and to be very clear, to come mainly from 25% of the so-called rich people in the world. Therefore, we have to be radical in the solution and not only marginal, knowing that we need, of course, a transition period to bring the people with us and not against those who are changing. Nobody wants to have changes as long as he is on the good side, on the proper and wealthy side. The Anthropocene, we quite brutally learned, we are heavily substituting and underlining what we call the welfare, the prosperity. We are externalizing costs. We are aware of this since a long time, no doubt. We are externalizing, and therefore we are lying with regard to the reason of our welfare. But the costs are not going away. Other people, other time, they have to bear it. We are transporting those costs. We are not calculating in our prices to the future, to future generations, to those people living in other parts of the world, mainly the poorest of the poor, and we are transferring it to nature. And nature doesn't have trade unions to protest against it. But nature is answering quite now, as we learned with this mentioned tipping point. All this is the externalization, which is the main topic, bringing our economic development to the next stage. And let me only mention shortly 3 parts where I believe we have to have the concentration of our activities. First, our way of living is not able to be globalized. If all the 8 billion people would like to live as we do it in Europe, the world would be broken. And we have to change it. I checked all the programs of the political parties running for the election in more than 1 week's time in Germany. I didn't find a single time the word sufficiency. And I believe we need something like a new ethic of enough, a new culture of limitation. And this is not only to make it via market prices or via regulations, that must be also understood as an ethical must. You see, we have now quite now again in Germany and in other parts of the world anyhow, the discussion of nuclear. And they are always arguing against it because it is too expensive. No, I don't argue against this because it is too expensive. I argue against it because it is ethically impossible to do something what cannot be handled later on. So the topic of changing our lifestyle seems to be on the top of the priority list. The second, yes, we need also in the future progress in technologies. We will decode and demantle nature in its structure deeper and deeper. But at the end of the day, technologies will not be enough, by far not be enough. I mentioned it in my point 1. And I would like to mention it also with regard to the fact that human decisions are always decisions with incomplete knowledge, and therefore we are always going deeper and deeper in the risk to have failure. And therefore the need for technologies is that they must be mistake-friendly. They must be open for changing and for repair, for recycling, for circular economy. This is a topic where we need it. And again, the ethical topic. I recommend again and again to read the encyclica of Pope Francis, Laudato Si. One topic, he always remind us that the technological paradigm is mankind deciding on nature, or is the nature on technology, or is technology deciding on mankind? And more, we are depending on technologies. We are losing alternatives, and we are losing with alternatives freedom. And I strongly recommend that our technology must be open for democratic participation, for decentralization, as I mentioned also, as mistake-friendly. Otherwise, they cannot be globalized in a world where we are living in. 8 years in Africa gives us a clear signal that they need also labor-intensive technologies. So to ask only for technologies is not enough. We must qualify what kind of technologies are necessary to overcome the burden and the limitations in a world with 8 and more billion people in the world. And last but not least, there are quite a lot of people believing that the market itself will make the things running and changing and bringing us out of the disaster. Yes, market economy has, without any doubt, obligation to make the best allocation of resources. We know it is, in lots of cases, is a majority better than the detailed planning procedures we learned in other systems in organizing our nations. If this is the case, we nevertheless, quite the contrary, as a precondition for markets, we need a legal structure. I'm arguing intensively for this legal structure. And then, in this structure, there might be also the market making the best solution, being maybe also the price structure. But to start with prices and believe that we are solving the problems via the prices seems to be me a dream. And a dream in those days is really life-threatening. Therefore, these 3 topics, our lifestyle, the topic how to handle technologies and how to integrate our organizational structure for markets and for allocations with a clear legal structure, with Ordnungsrecht, and integrate in this then the possibility for making market processes running for the best solution, and the best solution may be then also the most financially feasible solution, knowing that the risk of externalizing costs are in the beginning of the problem and came from markets, not from anywhere else. So this is something what I want to mention very short notice. I'm, as mentioned, honored to be a patron of this meeting. I know that these are the champions in the world, and that we have to do our utmost, not to sit down and say we got our prize, but that the prize is the starting point for concrete action in the future as well. And therefore, I'm so happy that the city of Basel and the university joined hands with our colleagues in Freiburg to make this meeting possible. I wish you a good and a very successful 2 days meeting. I know that this is in the framework of Sun 21. Also, this is some of the brand mark for Basel, knowing that on the other side, we also started with this quite intensively, quite early enough. All this together makes me proud, makes me happy. And knowing that good old friends, as you rightly mentioned, are sitting there, makes me a little bit angry and convinced. Maybe I had nevertheless take the time and come to Basel. Next time, hopefully, I will be there. That makes it necessary that I'm still in good health condition. Thank you very much. Have a good time.
Thank you very much, Klaus Töpfer, for your ongoing engagement in the ECEL and in the core questions.